A single photograph. For more than 100 years, it stayed in the archives, admired for its dignity and grace. But when modern technology finally showed what had been hidden in plain sight all along, scientists could hardly believe what they saw. What was it? What impossible detail had everyone missed? If you want to discover stories that history has forgotten, click the subscribe button and like this video. You won't believe where this journey will take us. Charleston, South Carolina, October 1899. Inside the studio of Mr. William Harrison, one of the few photographers in the city who welcomed black customers. A family prepared for a portrait that would become one of the most extraordinary photographs in all American history. The studio smelled of developing chemicals and furniture polish. Heavy velvet curtains blocked the afternoon sun, while gas lamps lit up a painted backdrop, showing a library with leather-bound books. This was the dream Harrison sold, a vision of success and good taste. Thomas, the father, wore a three-piece suit of dark wool, perfectly fitted, even though he worked as a master carpenter. His watch chain shone across his vest. Elizabeth, his wife, stood beside him in an elegant burgundy silk dress with black lace at the collar. Her hair was styled in the popular Gibson girl way. Their 5 children ranged from 23 down to 6 years old. The oldest son wore a suit nearly as nice as his father's. The daughters wore white blouses with high collars and long, dark skirts. The middle son looked a bit uncomfortable in his stiff collar, but stood straight. And then there was Samuel, the youngest, just 6 years old, wearing a small suit with short pants, white stockings, and polished shoes. His face showed that mix of seriousness and barely held fidgeting that all children had before cameras, when exposures needed complete stillness. Harrison positioned them carefully, Thomas and Elizabeth in the center, children arranged by height, with young Samuel in the front right. He placed a small table beside them, covering it with embroidered cloth and setting an open book on it. "Now, everyone hold very still," Harrison said. "Look at the lens. Think of something that makes you proud." The family froze. Samuel placed his hands at his sides, one resting lightly against his father's leg. The shutter opened. Light poured through the lens. Time stopped. The photograph was taken. Thomas paid $3 and returned 2 weeks later for the print. That photograph hung in their parlor for years, then moved through relocations and hard times, until it was given to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. It was catalogued, admired, studied, but no one noticed. The secret was there, captured in silver halide crystals, but invisible for the next 124 years. Dr. Rachel Foster had been working at the National Museum of African American History and Culture for 3 years. Her job was careful, often the same each day, but very meaningful. She scanned the museum's large collection of photographs using new technology that could capture details invisible to the naked eye. The new scanner was impressive, able to reach 4,800 dots per inch resolution, showing fabric texture, paper grain, even individual crystals of the original silver emulsion. It was made to preserve old images digitally while pulling out every possible detail. On a cold January morning in 2023, Rachel took a photograph from climate-controlled storage. The label read, "Thomas Family, Charleston, C. 1899. Studio portrait donated 1987. She had seen it before. Beautiful, striking in its dignity. The family's clothing, their posture, their direct gaze spoke of pride and success. Exactly the kind of image the museum valued. Proof of black prosperity in a time when such stories were often erased. Rachel placed the photograph on the scanner bed and started the scan. The image appeared line by line in amazing clarity. Faces showed first, then clothing, the painted backdrop, the decorative table. Then the scan reached the bottom, where young Samuel stood. Rachel's hand stopped. She leaned closer, her breath catching. Something about the child's right hand looked different. She zoomed in once, then again, and again, until the pixels became perfectly clear. "Oh my God," she whispered. Samuel's right hand, resting against his father's leg, had 6 fingers. Not a blurred spot, not a trick of light. 6 distinct, fully formed fingers, clearly visible in the high-resolution scan. Rachel sat back, her mind racing. She zoomed to the left hand, normal, 5 fingers. She returned to the right hand, 6 fingers, unmistakable. The extra digit appeared on the pinky side, post-axial polydactyly. It wasn't some small leftover. It looked normal in size, useful, just another finger. Rachel's heart beat fast as she searched the museum's database. Who was this family? Were there other photographs? Medical records? Within an hour, she had a name: Thomas, master carpenter of Charleston. Within 2 hours, she made a phone call that would change everything. Dr. Webb, this is Dr. Rachel Foster from the National Museum of African American History. I need you to come to Washington right away. I think I found something extraordinary. Dr. Marcus Webb arrived at the museum 48 hours later, a geneticist at Johns Hopkins University, specializing in hereditary conditions in African American populations. Marcus approached his work with deep respect for the painful history of how black bodies had been used in medical research. Rachel met him in the examination room, the 1899 photograph resting in an archival sleeve on a light table. Beside it, her laptop showed the high-resolution scan. "Thank you for coming," Rachel said. "I need you to tell me I'm not imagining this." Marcus pulled on white cotton gloves and lifted the photograph, studying it with his naked eye. At normal viewing distance, the family looked exactly as expected: dignified, well-dressed, proud. He could barely see individual fingers at this resolution. Then he looked at the digital scan. Rachel had zoomed in on Samuel's right hand. Marcus's eyes widened. Bilateral or unilateral? Unilateral. Only the right hand. Marcus studied the image closely. Post-axial polydactyly. The extra digit is beside the pinky finger. And look, it's not deformed. It appears fully formed with complete joints. He sat back, removing his glasses. This is remarkable. Polydactyly occurs in about 1 in every 1,000 births, but to capture it so clearly in an 1899 photograph, and for it to go unnoticed for over a century. "There's more," Rachel said, pulling out a thin folder. "The donor said this family were master carpenters in Charleston, multiple generations of skilled workers, highly respected." Marcus's interest grew. Multiple generations. Do we know if the trait appeared in other family members? That's what I need your help to find out. They began careful historical research. The 1900 census gave them basic information. Thomas, born around 1849, occupation carpenter. Elizabeth, his wife, 5 children, including Samuel, age 7. A property deed from 1897 showed Thomas had bought a building on King Street, important for a black man in that time. A clerk's note read, "Thomas, master carpenter of considerable reputation." They weren't struggling, Rachel observed. This was a successful family. Marcus nodded. Which makes me wonder if this child had a 6th finger and the family was prosperous. They clearly didn't hide it. They posed him front and center in a professional portrait. What does that tell us? Perhaps they didn't see it as shameful, Marcus replied. Or they knew about it and considered it normal because it ran in the family. Rachel leaned forward. Then we need to trace this lineage. If it's hereditary, there could be descendants alive today. The work was slow and difficult. Many post-Reconstruction records were incomplete, lost, or deliberately destroyed. Black families' births often went unregistered. The Great Migration scattered families across the country, breaking chains of documents. But Rachel was persistent, and Marcus was patient. They worked together across months, slowly putting together the Thomas family story. Church records from Morris Street Baptist Church in Charleston provided the first big find. Thomas and Elizabeth had been active members, and careful record-keeping showed their children's births and baptisms. Samuel, born March 1893. His older siblings James, Clara, Margaret, and William. But there was something else. A note in Samuel's baptismal record written in careful hand, received into God's grace, marked with his distinction, "Blessed be his Maker's hands." Maker's hands, Marcus repeated. That specific language. Rachel searched digitized church records. Look at this. A church newsletter from 1905 mentions Thomas's carpentry business taking on apprentices. It says, continuing the tradition of the maker's hands passed from father to son. Marcus felt the thrill of discovery. It's a family phrase, something inherited, something special about their hands. The genealogical trail led forward. James, the eldest, stayed in Charleston, continuing the carpentry business. His children appeared in the 1920 census. One son, Robert, appeared in city directories through the 1940s as a woodworker. Then the trail went cold. Robert disappeared from Charleston records after 1947. Marcus checked Great Migration records, databases of Black Americans who moved north during the World Wars. There, in a 1948 Philadelphia directory, Robert Thomas, carpenter, South Street. From Philadelphia, the trail continued. Robert's children and grandchildren. Some stayed in Pennsylvania. Others moved to Maryland, New Jersey, New York. Each generation took hours of searching. 3 months into their research, Rachel found a genealogy forum post that made her hands shake. "Marcus," she called. "I think I found him. A living descendant." The post was from David Clark, researching his Charleston ancestors named Thomas, mentioning carpentry, mentioning a family story about special hands. Rachel sent a message right away. The response came within an hour. "Yes. When can we meet? I've been waiting my whole life to understand my family's story." Dr. David Clark drove to the museum on a Saturday morning in early April. He was 47, an orthopedic surgeon at a Baltimore hospital, and had been researching his Charleston roots for nearly 6 years. "My grandfather died when I was 15, David explained in the conference room, but he used to tell stories about our ancestors, about Thomas the carpenter who built Charleston's finest furniture, about hands that could do things other hands couldn't, about a gift that passed through blood." He paused, emotion showing on his face. "I thought they were just tall tales, but then my daughter was born." Rachel leaned forward. "David, may I ask something personal? Do you have any unusual genetic traits?" David held out his right hand, palm up. There, beside his pinky finger, was a 6th finger, fully formed, naturally placed, clearly useful. "Only my right hand," he said quietly. "I was born with it. Doctors told my parents to have it surgically removed. They said it would make life easier, but my grandfather refused. He said, 'That hand is who we are. Don't you dare cut away what God and blood gave him.'" Marcus stared, his mind racing. "Do you know if other family members have this trait? My grandfather had it. Same hand, same finger. He was a carpenter like his father and grandfather. He joked that the extra finger made him better at his craft." David's voice grew thick. "My daughter has it too. She's 7. When she was born, and I saw that little 6th finger, I understood. It's not a defect. It's who we are." Rachel slid the 1899 photograph toward David. "We believe this is your great-great-grandfather, Thomas. And this," she pointed to Samuel, "we believe this is your great-grandfather." David took the photograph with trembling hands. He stared, taking in the formal poses, the fine clothing, the dignity. Then he looked at Samuel. Even in the original photograph, knowing what to look for, he could barely make out the subtle difference in the child's right hand. "I've never seen his face," David whispered. "My grandfather described him, but no photographs survived." He looked up, tears shining. "How did you find this?" Rachel explained the scanning technology. Marcus explained the genetic implications. "We'd like to conduct genetic testing," Marcus said carefully. "With your permission, if we can map the mutation and trace it through your family, we might be documenting one of the longest hereditary genetic traits in American history." David nodded. "What would you need?" "Blood samples from you and willing family members, and ideally your daughter if you consent." "I'll do it," David said immediately. "My daughter's proud of her hand. She calls it her special finger. She'll want to be part of this." The genetic testing took 6 weeks. Marcus collected blood samples from David, 3 cousins who agreed to participate, and with careful consent from David's daughter, Emma, the samples went to Johns Hopkins Genetics Lab for sequencing and analysis. While waiting for results, Marcus dove into medical literature. Polydactyly was well documented, occurring in about 1 in 10,000 births. It could be isolated or part of genetic syndromes. Postaxial polydactyly, extra digits on the pinky side, was more common in African and African American populations, suggesting ancient genetic origins. But what made a trait persist across generations? Most polydactyly cases were random. Hereditary cases existed, but rarely lasted beyond 3 or 4 generations in documented medical literature. If David's family truly traced this trait back to Samuel in 1899, and if Samuel had inherited it from his father, Thomas, and if family stories about earlier generations were accurate, they might be looking at one of the longest documented hereditary polydactyly lineages in medical history. The results arrived on a Tuesday morning. Marcus called Rachel and David right away, asking them to meet at his Johns Hopkins office. When they gathered around his desk, Marcus pulled up genetic sequencing data on his monitor. "I've confirmed it," he began, his voice tight with excitement. "The polydactyly in your family is caused by a specific mutation in the GLI3 gene, which controls limb development during fetal formation." He pulled up a molecular diagram. "This particular variant is very rare. I've searched global genetic databases. There are fewer than 20 documented cases worldwide with this exact mutation." David leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "It means your family's genetic line is extraordinarily unique," Marcus continued. "Based on the genealogical records Rachel compiled and the genetic testing we've conducted, we can now trace this trait back at least 6 confirmed generations, from your daughter Emma, born 2016, back to Samuel in the 1890s. He pulled up a family tree showing the documented generations with red markers indicating confirmed polydactyly, and based on family oral history and the church records that reference makers' hands being passed from father to son, the trait likely extends back even further, possibly to Thomas's father or grandfather, which would mean 8 to 10 generations total. Rachel spoke quietly. "That would place the origin sometime in the early to mid-1800s, possibly in the enslaved population." Marcus nodded. "The GLI3 mutation likely originated in West Africa. When your ancestor was enslaved and brought to America, he carried that gene. Because polydactyly is a dominant trait, it had a high chance of being passed to each generation." David sat back, absorbing the information. "My grandfather said the gift came from Africa, from ancestors who were makers and builders." "He was right," Marcus said. "And there's something else." He pulled up comparative data. "I've been analyzing hand function and dexterity. David, your 12-fingered hands don't just give you more digits. They give you measurably better fine motor control in specific tasks. Your ancestors weren't just proud because their hands were unique. They were proud because those hands made them genuinely exceptional craftsmen." With genetic confirmation, Marcus and Rachel increased their historical research, determined to trace the trait as far back as possible. They returned to Charleston, visiting historical societies, church archives, and even elderly community members whose families had lived in the city for generations. Mr. James Washington, a 91-year-old archivist at a small low-country museum, provided unexpected insight. "Six-Finger Thomas," he said, when Marcus mentioned the name. "My grandfather used to tell stories. Said Thomas was the finest craftsman he'd ever seen, could shape wood like it was clay." He pulled out a worn leather journal, his grandfather's notes from the 1920s. "My grandfather was a wheelwright. He worked sometimes with Charleston carpenters. He wrote this after Thomas passed away in 1923. Marcus read aloud. "Thomas died yesterday, age 75. The finest carpenter Charleston never knew. His son, James, carries on the work, and James's boy, too, both with their grandfather's blessed hands. They say the